Welcome to Mercworks, episode 24. I'm John G., co-host with...
This is Brad.
And today's episode is brought to you by Buckley Traditions, high-quality, full-grain leather products that are saddle-stitched, made to last a lifetime. Use promo code Mercworks at checkout for 10% off the entire order. BuckleyTraditions.com. For episode 24, today's guest is Evan Ratliff. He's an American journalist, author, and podcast host, and contributor to Wired Magazine, Bloomberg, and The New Yorker. And the center of today's podcast is going to be on his book, The Mastermind, Drugs, Empire, Murder, Betrayal. Thanks for coming on, Evan.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
So how did you first get into writing or finding out about the center of The Mastermind, Paul Le Roux?
Well, I mean, I can't claim credit for being the first person to uncover Paul Le Roux's name, unfortunately. But what happened was way back in 2012. Well, let's say 2012, Paul Le Roux got arrested. So we can talk about why he got arrested and all that.
Okay.
But so he was actually held in secret custody. No one knew that he had been arrested. They were using him as a source to try to unravel his whole empire. But it did come out in 2014, I think, that a guy named Joseph Hunter had been arrested. And this made the news because Joseph Hunter was former U.S. Army, acting as a mercenary. He was arrested in a plot to assassinate DEA agents. So this was like, CNN, it was in the New York Times. And the thing that was not included in any of those stories was who was Joseph Hunter working for? Like, he clearly was operating as a mercenary on behalf of someone, but it wasn't at all clear who it was. And so that was the point where I kind of hooked into the story and started looking around, trying to figure out what is going on with this guy. Like, why was he involved in this plot to begin with? And actually, a New York Times reporter beat me to figuring out who the person was who had hired him. His name was Paul Le Roux, and published a story saying this guy has been hired by this guy, Paul Le Roux, who seems to be some sort of internet drug kingpin, maybe. And so that was the point where I kind of like grabbed hold of the story, because once I had the name, I was able to kind of like start looking into his empire all over the world, which was extensive. And so I then spent basically a better part of the next 5 years trying to figure out who Paul Le Roux was, what had happened to him, what kind of organization he built, and what were sort of all the aftermath and consequences of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Paul,
as you get into what he did, I think the New York Post has a perfect headline. It's a perfect headline to sum up kind of who he is in a nutshell that we can elaborate from. But it says how a fat computer geek became the Jeff Bezos of the dark web. But yeah, after reading the book, I'm like, yeah, that's it. That sums it up perfectly.
That's one way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I'll give you the brief. It's hard. It's actually hard to summarize. He was involved in so many activities. It becomes hard to summarize. But basically, he started out, he was a computer programmer. He was an expert in encryption. He wrote a pretty famous piece of encryption software. And then he decided that he wanted to get into selling prescription pills online. Now, this is way back in 2004, where this is sort of a new thing. It's an unregulated market. It might be legal, but it's a real gray area kind of market. And what he honed in on was selling painkillers to American customers through American pharmacies. So recruiting American doctors to write basically fake prescriptions for anyone who went to a website to buy a painkiller, some of which were opioids. And then that prescription went to an American pharmacy, which then shipped out the prescription. So he sold tens of millions of doses a year of painkillers. And at his peak, the DEA estimated he was making something like $250 million a year, which is like more than Facebook was making in 2008. So that was his main business. And he really is a computer genius. So he built all these sort of layers to hide himself. He had hundreds of shell companies all over the world that he was sort of maneuvering this network through. And then once he achieved that success, he sort of decided for a variety of reasons to get into sort of more mainstream crime. So then he started dealing arms. He started dealing other drugs that were not painkillers, cocaine, tons of methamphetamine, which he was buying out of North Korea. He decided to sell arms materials and weapons software to Iran. He decided to launder money through gold in Africa. He had illegal timber operations. Like he basically tried to be, almost explicitly tried to be, like the world's most prolific criminal. And of course, in the process of that, there were issues that needed resolving that he eventually brought on like a security team, a quote unquote security team to deal with, which then devolved into violence where, at least 7 people are established that he murdered, but there were many other sort of deaths and bombings and shootings around his empire that were never resolved. So that's sort of the totality of Paul Le Roux's like work.
Busy bee.
He was a workaholic, truly. I mean, that's what everyone says who worked with him. Like he just stayed because he ran everything from his laptop. He had this encrypted laptop where he had designed all the encryption software for his own laptops, encrypted mail system that he used. So he basically just sat in a house in the Philippines for most of this time, for years, just running this from his laptop, like 19 hours a day. Like he didn't sleep much. He was devoted entirely to expanding his empire, which included things like trying to initiate a coup in the Seychelles. He had a plan for that. He had a whole installation in Somalia with mercenaries that he was going to set up shop there. So you can go in any direction you want, but there are sort of endless criminal operations that he kind of got his hands into, but all kind of, flowed up to him.
And did he first become, I guess, looked at by the U.S. government? Was this at something the DEA started through their diversion investigations? Is that kind of how the beginning of the end for him?
Yeah, that's how he got on the radar. And I think that was, I might get my dates wrong now, but I think it was all the way back in 2006. So that would be, it was like 6 years before they actually got him. The diversion investigators, you're right, in Minnesota, started looking into him basically because they busted these pharmacies. And they would find these pharmacies that were FedExing out, thousands upon thousands of prescriptions for painkillers. And they were just they were like, what is going on here? Like, where are these coming from? And so they started trying to pull the strings. They eventually found some leads that took them back to Le Roux in Manila, where he was operating from. But the problem was, partly because they worked in the diversion division, like they couldn't really get the resources to go after him. And you needed a lot of resources to go after him, in part because he had bribed everyone up and down the Philippine police force and judges, politicians. And so, he could get intel when they came to start investigating him. He knew, he had contacts, including inside the U.S. embassy. So he knew when they were coming after him. So you needed real firepower to actually try and get him. And then, basically what happened was eventually he ended up on the CPOT list, the sort of most wanted list of the DEA. And then the 960 group, the narco-terrorism kind of, agents who have way more resources and way more ability to go around the world and try to make these kind of big sting operations. They got interested in him later, although they often will claim that they were the first ones to find him.
Yeah, I felt bad for the DEA agents out of Minnesota. They kind of had their case kind of yanked from them and, kind of taken over by DC. I think it was I can't remember the name of the specialized group that you're describing, but yeah, I felt bad for him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They spent years on it, and they're the people that really brought Le Roux to light. But in fairness, they couldn't bring it in, and so this was the crew inside the DEA that could bring him in. Now, I think the Minnesota agents would argue, they could have done it in cooperation with them rather than sort of taking the case out from under them. But the 960 group has an answer to that, which is, we needed to do it our way, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So there was some infighting there, but they did set up a very elaborate, very impressive sting operation that eventually lured Le Roux to Liberia, where they were able to arrest him. They had a guy from inside the organization who was able to bring a confidential informant in to sort of tell Le Roux that they were going to be, trafficking a bunch of drugs through Liberia, but they were able to actually get him to come have an in-person meeting there, because he even fled the Philippines when he knew the DEA was looking for him, and he was hiding out in Brazil, and they couldn't get him out of Brazil either, so they eventually got him in Liberia.
Yeah, so he shifted to the drugs. Was that because RX Limited began receiving too much scrutiny? He kind of saw the writing on the wall that, all right, this scheme isn't going to last forever, so I've got to, I guess, diversify?
That's one reason I think. I mean, I should say, like, his motivations are not entirely clear, because he never really said, I've interviewed lots of people who, were working with him at the time, so they all have different versions of what they think, the reasons they think he sort of like expanded his empire once he was already making, hundreds of millions of dollars reportedly at the time. But I think that is one reason. Like, the screws were tightening a little bit because, number one, the U.S. government was kind of getting onto opioids as a problem. And so they made some of the drugs he was selling had not been even scheduled drugs. Like, they weren't actually illegal to sell. You just needed a prescription, but they weren't tightly controlled. They weren't scheduled on the DEA schedule. And they did add them to the schedule. So that created more legal jeopardy. But also things like credit card processors were being pushed to not process these sort of online pill mill kind of prescriptions. And so he kept losing his credit card processors, and he kept having to shift the operation. So that is one reason. But I think the other reason is more, it's a bit more mysterious, but I liken it to, it's like, if you look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg, when Facebook became a multi-billion dollar company and he became a multi-billionaire, you could say, like, well, why does he keep trying to expand Facebook? Like, why doesn't he go ride jet skis and like have a good time? But instead they keep trying to make it bigger. They buy other companies. They buy, Instagram, and Paul Le Roux had that mentality. He was really a kind of like tech CEO just on the other side of the law. And so his mode was expansion, growth, like grow the operation, like let's launder money for drug cartels. Let's sell drugs for more money. Like, let's just keep expanding in the way that you would expand a corporation if your mode was sort of like grow or die.
Mm-hmm. And at his side, at least at the beginning, Dave Smith comes along.
Yeah, Dave Smith.
What a character.
A prominent character. Yeah. Crazy. I'll tell you a crazy fact about Dave Smith, which is in the book that I think is in a footnote. So no one ever reads footnotes. But Dave Smith was featured in a profile and it wasn't a profile of him, but a profile of contractors that were working in Iraq in, like, I don't know, let's say, I don't know the date exactly, let's say like 2002 or something like that, 2003, in Esquire magazine. And the reporter for that story, who went to Iraq and interviewed these contractors, one of whom was Dave Smith, who's named in the article, the reporter for that was Tucker Carlson.
Oh, wow.
Small world.
That's, Dave Smith is kind of how we landed on your book it was a previous episode with Johnny Dwyer, but about Liberia. And he's like, after the episode we quit recording, he's like, hey, you need to check this book out. So that's when we landed on The Mastermind.
I love Johnny's book. Yeah, I love Johnny's book, and his book was actually, very helpful to me because Dave Smith makes an appearance there. Because after Dave Smith, he says that he was like British SAS, like. I was never able to track down his exact military background. He was in the military in the UK. But then after that, he sort of, floated around, as guys often do. And then he ended up as an advisor to Charles Taylor in Liberia. And so he was some sort of military advisor. And Johnny writes about this in his book. And he became very close with Charles Taylor's son, who like subsequently was convicted of torture and served prison in the United States. And so he was like this strange he just pops up there. And then when everything went down and everything went bad for Charles Taylor's son, he got arrested. Dave Smith just disappeared. And then he resurfaced in Iraq. And then he kind of goes quiet for a while then. And then he resurfaces with Le Roux. And by my understanding, my reporting, the way that he got involved with Le Roux was, there's a lot you guys would know, like there's a lot of guys just sort of floating around willing to do this or that. And some have different, like, tolerances for how gray market that kind of stuff is. Yeah. And certainly Dave Smith had a very high tolerance. So, it started out just hiring him as protection. Like Le Roux had just like millions of dollars in cash and gold around everywhere. And so he needed security for what he had gotten into. So he brought in Dave Smith, and then Dave Smith brought in all sorts of guys that he was connected to from his various time in Iraq. I can't remember if he went to Afghanistan or not. And those guys became the security team. But then over time, Le Roux's quest got darker and darker. And, there were guys who were willing to do it, and there were guys who left. And I've talked to both. Mm-hmm. And, and eventually it became not just protect my stuff, but, that person cheated me, like they need to be sent a message, then it became bombing someone's house, and so it all kind of like spiraled. Mm-hmm. But Dave Smith was the leader of the security team up until the point that Le Roux had another contractor execute him.
Yeah. And Dave Smith was, I guess he liked to drink a lot and party a lot, and was, I guess, skimming off of Le Roux's gold.
So, yeah. So Le Roux thought, and I think most of the people that I talked to in that circle thought that was the case. That, he at some point, he felt underpaid. He felt that he was out there maybe taking all the risk and getting them out of these situations. And Le Roux was sort of sitting back home, telling him to do this and do that. And so, how much he took is unclear. Like people have definitely gone and, including Le Roux's henchmen, but other people, and like dug up around his houses looking for the gold. But supposedly he skimmed a bunch of gold because they kept moving gold through Hong Kong, and they would launder money by buying gold in Africa, taking the gold to Hong Kong, basically trading it for like gold bars, and then bringing the gold bars to the Philippines by boat, and then stashing that everywhere. So the rumor, at least, was that he had buried a bunch of gold actually under the hot tub outside of his house. And Le Roux found out, and then Le Roux sort of lured him to a property that Le Roux had, brought in another guy, a hitman from South Africa, and that guy took him out. And then Le Roux also like fired some bullets just to sort of show that he was a tough guy, and then they buried him at sea.
What a way to go. And the South African hitman, he was never caught or identified. Is that correct? Or he got away, right?
He was identified, but no, not caught. No, okay. He's, as far as I know, living life to this day. I have interviewed him, and he committed multiple murders on Le Roux's behalf, and seems to be suffering some psychological consequences from that. But as far as I know, he has never been picked up. And the U.S. government absolutely knew where he was. They tried to lure him to the States to arrest him, and it didn't work.
So once Smith is, off the board, is Joseph Hunter takes over, or is like the, I guess, head mercenary at this point?
Yep. Joseph Hunter became the sort of head of, the kill team is what the prosecutors would often call it. And he had a kind of team of guys under him who were willing to do all sorts of stuff, including surveil and kill people who, supposedly owed money or had taken money from Le Roux, beyond just Dave Smith. But I'm talking about small ball kind of stuff. I mean, there's one person who owed Le Roux like $100. I think it was either $100 or $1,000. I can't remember now. That Le Roux had on his hit list. Like that's how sort of petty it all was.
Right. Life was cheap.
Joseph Hunter. Yeah. I mean, I guess when you get into that world, part of it is just sort of like, well, I need to send a message to everyone. Like you can't steal from me. Like no one steals from me, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these guys, including Le Roux, like they've watched too many movies. So it's sometimes it all sounds like a movie, and it's partly because they're like playing out a role that they've seen in a movie. But in any case, Joseph Hunter, who had been U.S. Army, he again like had been a contractor, had gone abroad, and he had guys that he was connected to, so he had a team, and they all worked for. They had a company. It was called Echelon Associates, I think, or just Echelon. That was their like contracting company that was like, based in the Philippines.
Okay.
And they all supposedly worked for this thing, but actually, like the whole thing was just a front that they were working for Le Roux.
Gotcha. And Hunter, he too, I guess, vetted and hired additional hitmen or mercenaries for on Le Roux's behalf.
Yeah, I mean, he did, and they, they were. It seemed like they were always recruiting. Like I've seen the recruiting emails, and they would, they would sort of pass around these emails where they, they would say, "We're looking for, somebody to go guard this or that," and to be honest, like the jobs were, to many of these guys that I've spoken to, the jobs were amazing. Like they were fascinating. They were incredible adventures. And you got guys like flying into the Congo to sort of like grab a bag of gold and get out while there's other people trying to steal it from them. And, just like unbelievable stuff. And so it did attract, it attracted some really skilled individuals, but also the part of it that was sort of like eventually full of violence and, explicitly like, we want you to come in and take this person out, also attracted just straight up morons, like just people who had no experience and no ability and just bumbled around. And so it's like an interesting, for me at least, like interesting contrast between like the highly skilled people that they had, and then the further you go, like the harder it is to get good help in some sense. And so actually they're like
the two guys he hired, or that Joseph Hunter hired from North Carolina to do, I thought this was a weird way to name it, but he called it bonus work, to take out the real estate agent, Catherine Lee, in the Philippines.
Yeah. And these two guys, I mean, both of them were eventually convicted of that crime and are in federal prison. Like, I went to the whole trial, like whatever you want to say about these guys. And one of them at least like proclaims his innocence still to this day. They were not sophisticated operators. Like one of them was sort of like always, I don't think he even had any military experience. And he was always like going around making up stories about he's done this, he's done that, undercover this and undercover that. These guys like basically like almost like stolen valor kind of guy. And then the other one had some experience, but just like they were not equipped for this sort of thing. But really, in some sense, like they were just there to kind of like take the fall. Like they were flown to the Philippines, given a dossier of this real estate agent, and paid, I can't remember the exact number, we're talking like 30 grand or something, to pretend to be people who were looking for real estate, put her in a van, and then execute her. And then they just wired the money back, allegedly, through Western Union. So like, we're not talking about like some kind of high skill, high desperation,
And they kept the getaway
like
car
around.
They kept the van keys or something like that, I believe.
That's one of the things that took down. Is they found number one, they found a digital camera on which they had taken photos of the woman who they had killed, because they needed the photos in order to prove that they had done the job.
It was a photo of her head, right? Her severed head was on the.
But they had shot her in the head. Yeah, they kept these gruesome photos. I mean, maybe they kept them as like trophies. Who knows? And then they had the key to the minivan in which she was killed. And so I was actually there when the Philippine police, like they had it a lot. Like I went and saw it. It was just sitting there. And then eventually they got these guys. They searched their house. They found the key, and some guy from the DEA, I think, had to fly to Manila, go to the lot, and like put it in the van. And sure enough, it started right up. It's like, I mean, that kind of tells you like the level of operators we're talking about here.
Yeah. And they left a blood stain in the van too, right? Which was also, I found that part of the book interesting. It's like when they opened the van, there was a big blood stain in the carpet. Like, it's been years.
Yeah,
Why
didn't
did
even
you
clean it.
take the carpet out? Yeah.
Yeah, get rid of the van. I mean, part of it was just the sort of level of impunity that Le Roux was operating in, because
Right.
he believed, I think correctly, that no one could get him in the Philippines. Like, the Philippine authorities were not going to bring him down. He had spent millions of dollars bribing people. So he I'm sure they were just sloppy operators, because what difference did it make to him? No Philippine police officer was going to show up and arrest him.
Mm-hmm.
But for these guys, once the U.S. government got onto it, like, they were in real trouble, because they had done very little to cover their tracks. I mean, one guy essentially confessed as soon as they started talking to him.
So with RX Limited, I mean, what was his criminal exposure with that? He wasn't really doing anything besides filling pharmacy orders, from what I could tell. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's so puzzling about the whole situation. It's that when he was selling those pharmaceuticals, it's really not clear that it was illegal, because, I mean, we're talking about things like tramadol, Fioricet, and the other one's Soma. So it's like muscle relaxers. One of them is truly a synthetic opioid, and one of them has barbiturate in it. So they're like, they're like powerful painkillers, but there was no actual law. I mean, if you have a prescription, you can obtain these drugs.
Right.
Anyone who's been in a car accident and hurt their back, like, could get one of these drugs. A doctor just prescribed it. What the prosecutor said was illegal was sort of like the volume of it, almost like proved that it was fake, that the whole operation was fake, and that all they were doing was distributing these drugs. So that, I think, is obviously true. Like, they had doctors on retainer. They were paying to just fill like hundreds of prescriptions a day. So all you had to do was go to a website and say, like, you fill in a form, you say, I have back pain, give me your address, give me your credit card number. And then some doctor just goes, check. And then it goes to a pharmacy, and then it's FedEx to your house. That's how it worked. And when they went after a bunch of the doctors and the pharmacists who were all in on this. They'd all been recruited to be a part of it. They had never heard of Paul Le Roux. They had just been recruited to be part of this. They were all making good money on it, because they were paid by the prescription to fill them. And a bunch of them instantly, like, pleaded guilty, and some of them served prison time. But a few of them fought it. And I went to that trial too in Minnesota. And eventually, I mean, it was a really poor prosecution, but like, they couldn't get convictions of them, because they just said, like, I was doing my job. I got a prescription. A pharmacist said, I got a real prescription, filled the prescription. That's my job. The doctor said, hey, these symptoms came in. I looked at the symptoms, wrote a prescription. There's nothing illegal about it. And they were acquitted. And so eventually, like, it's not even clear they ever could have gotten Paul Le Roux on the pills. But of course, he had expanded into all these other things. And so ultimately, that's what he was convicted of. He wasn't actually convicted. I think maybe some money laundering connected with it, but he was never convicted on the prescription pill front.
I felt kind of a little bit of sympathy for I think it was the old elderly pharmacist out of Minnesota, or I can't remember which
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Yeah. I kind of felt bad for that guy. He, at least by my reading of the book, he genuinely believed what he was doing was on the up and up, and it kind of,
or close enough.
Yeah.
To the up and up.
Yeah, and he's like running a small business. He's been at it for years. He's like getting close to retirement. He's got a family support, and he gets this offer, fill these prescriptions. This is a new high-tech thing. He's not sophisticated at all. They send him all we'll send you a computer, we'll send you everything. All you need to do is just look at this screen, get the prescriptions off them, put them in this FedEx thing. We'll send you the labels. The labels print up automatically. Like, everything was set for him. And the reality is, like, this is a business now, like, this is a legal business. And so the idea that he thought it was a legal business at the time, like, it's not that crazy. Now, I think the counter argument to that is, if you see thousands of painkiller prescriptions coming through your pharmacy, you have some responsibility to sort of say, is something going on here? Like, are people addicted? Like, there is a sort of duty of care. And I think that's kind of where it came from. But from a legal perspective, it's a little bit tricky, because like every step of the process is completely legal. And I think that's what what he would have said.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Walgreens does it, right? I mean, how many prescriptions for painkillers does Walgreens fill a day? As a company.
Yeah. And especially
A
at that
ton.
time, I mean, this is like almost we're getting into the heart of the opioid epidemic, where all these pharmacies were just like doling out this stuff like candy. Doctors were giving it out like candy. And then you get into like the real sort of like back alley pill mill kind of stuff. But, you know, uh, at the very least, like Paul Le Roux was sort of like a big player in a thing that was happening in society that nobody was paying attention to until they finally did.
Right place at the right time kind of deal for him, probably. And then having the computer knowledge and the ability to set up that network. The network just seems crazy with the different call centers, different countries. It's so insulated. It feels like as I was reading, I'm like I said, I was like, what's he doing that could be illegal? He's running a business, and you have all these different countries, all these different jurisdictions. What is he actually doing that you could get him on? And it felt like nothing.
Yeah. And hundreds of employees. He's got huge call centers in the Philippines. He's got huge call centers in Israel. He's got stuff opening in India. Like, he seems very much like a normal, business person. And there's lots of, if you go to, Manila, there's lots of sort of boiler room type operations. Like, the line between sort of like the up and up call center and the boiler room call center is like sometimes very difficult to distinguish. And so he's operating in this world, and many, many people who worked for him had no idea, number one, that this was illegal in any way, or who he was. Like, they didn't know about the drugs, they didn't know about the arms, they didn't know about the murders, like none of that. They were just sort of shocked. Like, some of them, when I contacted them years later, they still didn't know. They learned it because I called them to ask them about it.
What was the Israeli connection? How did he recruit so many of them? Because there was the call centers, and then he was recruiting, I guess, former IDF special forces to guard residences and guard gold. Like, why? I mean, I guess they have a large pool of, fighting age males that are former military, but why the Israeli, I guess, connection?
Well, I'm not going to be able to remember the original person that came, but originally he hired some Israelis. I think the first guy maybe was already working in the Philippines, or it's possible that they met online, and they were both doing sort of like interested in pill operations. I think that's what it was. Now I think about it, that he met someone online because he was starting this pill operation, and he would put up these advertisements like, I'm looking for people who work from home to do this, that, and the other. And so he basically met a couple of us Israeli guys, and he started having them run the call center operations.
Okay.
So they would come to the Philippines, run his call center operations until they got burned out maybe, and then they would leave. Then eventually open call center operations in Israel. And through the guys that came there, he eventually, everyone has to serve in Israel. Like, lots of people have been in. And so somebody knew somebody who knew someone who was in the Dov Divan, which is like, they do undercover operations in Gaza and things like that, or the West Bank and things like that. They're like, I think it was a TV show that made them famous now, but there were some guys that were in that. So they were basically like pretty specialized, special forces type guys. I don't know if they technically call that the special forces there, and so he got a few of those guys. And so he had some of them guard gold in Hong Kong. He had some of them go to Africa to guard his operations, some of them worked their way up. And like, when you get one guy in, he's got a bunch of buddies who also served, who are also now out of the military and doing contracting. And he says, hey, come along. This is amazing. You'll have amazing adventures. And there's this rich guy, and he has you do crazy operations where you're surveilling people in Papua New Guinea, just like insane stuff. And that's attractive to a certain amount of people. It did pay actually insanely well, I think, but it paid pretty well. And so then suddenly he's got a network of Israeli guys too. And so when you look back at it, people find it very sort of like, a lot of people think like Le Roux is actually a spy. He worked for the NSA, he worked for the CIA, this and that. It's of course always possible. It's very difficult to disprove. But I think the connections were much more mundane than that. But you look and you're like, oh, he's got these like top special forces guys from Israel working for him. Like, he must be somebody. And really, it was just sort of like a network. Like, he networked and they networked, and like, that's how it happened.
So at some point he started, can you talk about his Somali venture? It was going to be tuna fishing. Is that correct? Through a company called Southern Ace, but at the same time they're hiring, I guess displaced Somali militias as well, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it came about like a lot of his sort of operations. It was almost like he had an idea, and then he would just send a guy or send a guys to try to see if it was viable. And so he sent some guys to Somalia, one guy in particular, to go kind of basically the 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 operation front was tuna fishing. Now, to this day, like the guy he just will say like it was a good business. Like there was a good business to be had there. And the explanation was that because of the Somali piracy at the time, there was so much Somali piracy that, they were taking over boats and, all that sort of stuff. There was actually like underfished because like no one would come fish in their waters because they had piracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a whole tuna, like there were schools of tuna out there to be had. And so if they could set up this operation, they could have the tuna operation. A little bit dubious, but it's like it's not untrue that there's just probably a fishing opportunity off the coast of Somalia. But also he always wanted to set up somewhere where he would be just untouchable. And so that was one part of the Somali idea was like, if we get these militias, so they recruited the militia, they were paying a local militia basically to protect their little compound. And then they were trying to figure out how to build a route from the coast into their compound, which is inland. And really, he also wanted to traffic drugs through there, to manufacture drugs there. Could they grow drugs there? Like these were all the things that they were exploring. But they brought in a ton of heavy weaponry to defend the compound and also to potentially like take on other militias. And so it became this sort of like larger operation that in the end, like I'm not sure it really had a point. Like I don't think it could have achieved any of his aims, legitimate or illegitimate.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the guys who were running it like had a crazy time like fighting off other militias and like driving through the desert with their trucks mounted with heavy weaponry and things like that. Like it was all very odd. But he had a lot of those, like he would just try, he sent someone to Iran to try to figure out if he could sell weapons to Iran, and it works. He sent someone to South America to try to seek out drug cartels that he could buy from, and it worked. So he would just take a flyer on stuff and see what came back.
Odd.
So his undoing, by this point, the DEA is looking at him and they're trying to, I guess, create a ruse to draw him out of Brazil. Is that correct?
Yeah, he relocated to Brazil. He fled the Philippines. I think he thought maybe they had sort of penetrated his networks there, and maybe he had lost some of his protection. So I think he got on his yacht initially, and he was sort of, I don't know if he was at sea or what, but he ended up in Brazil. And then, the DEA was trying to get him, and they had the guy who had run the Somali operation had actually left the organization. He had a falling out with Le Roux, and he left the organization. And he contacted, I think he initially contacted the CIA station in South Africa. And eventually someone came across this tip and they decided, we can get this guy to go back to Le Roux, rejoin the organization, and that'll be our in. So that's what he did. He was willing to go back. He met with Le Roux in the Philippines. He kind of patched things up with him. And then he started saying, I've got this contact who's from the Colombian cartels and he's got a huge deal and but I'll connect you with him. Then they connected. Then the scenario was like he had to go to Liberia in order to like finalize the deal. So they had a confidential informant who they paid to pose as the Colombian cartel guy. And so he flew to Liberia for a meeting with that guy, which they did have the meeting, and then they arrested him after that.
And at this point, he's, I guess, on a plane back to the U.S., and he agrees to flip or cooperate with the DEA?
Yeah, immediately, like on the plane. Like as soon as he was sort of like, what can I do for you? Like, what do you want to know? How can I help you?
No loyalty.
Well, to one person, he has a lot of loyalty. But
Well, yeah. I mean, the amazing thing is, like, in the meeting that was set up in Liberia, I have a recording of the meeting. And in the meeting itself, he talks about snitches. He says, you know, my people know basically, like, if you talk, you know, it's not going to be good for you. So if you get picked up, like, keep your mouth shut. He's kind of like very brash and bragging to this supposed cartel guy across from him. And they have a nice conversation about it. And then not 24 hours later, he's arrested and he's on a plane, like, not keeping his mouth shut. Because who's he going to protect? He doesn't care about the guys under him. There's no one above him. So it's just himself.
So at this point, once he's, I guess, a DEA or being debriefed by the DEA, he starts setting up stings on behalf of the DEA to, I guess, tear down his network or, people working for him.
Yeah, because nobody knew that he had been arrested. So people inside of his network, because they were already sprawled all over the world. So, they might not hear from him for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then suddenly he would pop up again and he would send them an encrypted email and say, do this, do that. So when they brought him back to the US, they immediately started debriefing him. And then they let him back into his email so that he could contact people and say, hey, I've been out of action for a while, but now I'm getting back into it. I want to do this. I want to do that. And so they used him to set up these sting operations, including the one that we started with, which was the Joseph Hunter sting operation. He said, I need you to go to Liberia and I need you to kill basically these DEA agents who are on my trail. And, Hunter and his group agreed to do it. He said, they set up another sting operation about selling meth and they got a group of guys for that. And then he tried to lure some of the other people to the States to do a job. So they were basically deploying him all over the world because people didn't know that he'd actually been arrested. They thought he'd just gone underground.
Gotcha. Well, I guess it worked out well for Le Roux in the end, or Le Roux. Because he too, didn't he testify against some of these folks?
He did. He testified against Joseph Hunter and the two guys from North Carolina in their trial for killing the real estate agent in the Philippines. So he testified in New York. And, he had cut a deal. So, the prosecutors had to go and sort of say, he was very helpful to us and, his sentence should be adjusted accordingly. He didn't get that much off of his actual sentence. But I mean, the main thing is he didn't get prosecuted for the murders, the guys who were prosecuted for the murders who worked for him got life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
And he got 20 years, and he was the one who ordered the murder.
It was
a little bit upside down.
Yeah. And I mean, and out of all the bad things he was doing, like, he got off that 20 years is pretty light. Because
that's light.
When was he was taken into custody in Liberia, I think, 2012?
2012, yeah.
So, I mean, he didn't have that much longer to go.
6 years.
Yeah, I think 2034. I can't remember his exact release date, but yeah, something like that. Yeah, so he got some time served because he'd been in custody the whole time. Yeah, so given the range of crimes that he admitted to, now what the prosecution will say is, we wouldn't have known about these murders if he hadn't confessed to them. Like, we wouldn't have been able to prosecute anyone, including him. So that's their argument, and I think that's true on its face. But the way these things normally work is you get the lower level guys, and then you work your way up to try to get the big guys. So if you're going to flip people, you flip people in order to get the person who's ultimately more responsible. Right. And they did the opposite, which is they flipped the guy who was ultimately responsible in order to get the lower level people. And from my experience of my reporting and talking to a lot of these guys, a lot of them just dispersed. It wasn't like they took out Le Roux, but if they didn't get these other guys, they were going around the world committing more murders for the cartel. Because there was no cartel. The whole thing was Le Roux. So once they had Le Roux, there really was no network to dismantle. Everyone just sort of like went back to their lives. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't have gone after these guys and gotten them, but it just means like the idea that they needed to flip Le Roux to get these other guys is, I think there are some questions there.
Hmm.
Some of the leniency was, with North Korea and Iran. I think him trying to flip on them, but nothing ever ultimately came of that, right? With the North Korea and Iran stuff. Is that right?
I didn't give them anything useful. No, that's in my understanding, and I have a pretty good source on that. He had sold weapons technology to Iran. Like, I see why it's enticing, and it makes sense that they thought that they could get something from him. But ultimately, the contacts were all dead ends. Like, they didn't get any good intelligence. He had bought meth from North Korea. He had tried to buy a submarine from North Korea. Like, he had contacts in North Korea, but again, like, not anything that got them anywhere. So yeah, I mean, I think that is part of why they thought, well, let's get this guy a deal. He knows everyone all over the world, and in the end, like, they didn't really get anything for it.
Outsmarted them again. What about the Bitcoin connection? That seems to be, if you Google him, that seems to be the thing that everybody cares about the most for some reason.
Yeah, that's, oh man, how much time do we have? That's I mean, it's my fault. I would say, because when I was first reporting the story, someone sent me his fake passport. He had a fake passport, and the fake passport, the name on the passport is Paul. I think Paul Calder Salochi, SALOTSHI or something like that, which is very similar to Satoshi. And so that was the initial thing. And people would ask me, like, when I published an image of it back in 2016 in the original story that I did. And so that sort of started people asking questions. And I also had this question that early on, I was like, he could have created Bitcoin because he has all the skills to do it. And, some of the motivations and the secrecy, like, there's like a lot of circumstantial evidence. And so I looked into it. I could not validate anything. Then again, I went back again after the book came out in 2019, because more and more people after the book came out were like talking about it could be him. I looked at it again, and it's very difficult to summarize because there's just so many ins and outs of like the Satoshi Nakamoto situation. But my basic stance is he's possibly the best known candidate for Satoshi Nakamoto. Like, no one has ever provided anything to me that would show that it could not be him. Like, there's no timing thing. There's no like skill-based thing. No one has ever shown in any way that it couldn't be him. On the other hand, I think it's probably someone we've never heard of that's never surfaced. That's my belief. And so I think like the chances that it's actually him are quite low, because I think it's someone else. And I should add that he has denied it. Like, I have sources that he has denied it too. So, but wouldn't you deny it if you were given, if you wouldn't want people to know that you were maybe worth, billions of dollars when you got out. So anyway, the short of it is there's a lot of evidence that it could be him. And I understand why people over and over and over again decide like, Le Roux's my guy. He's my Satoshi. But I always try to temper it with like, there's no proof that it is him. Like, there's nothing, I could never find anything definitive that really linked him to it, other than like, he could have done it. He had the skills, all these sorts of things. And so it's all just like a circumstantial case. And ultimately, I think it's not quite convincing.
It's very interesting too, like the connections that'll get made, because then you also have like the Edward Snowden connection with TrueCrypt. So it's like Bitcoin, Edward Snowden, telemedicine. Like, this guy is almost like a gray market renaissance man in his own way. If you think about it.
It's true. He was into everything. And and he also, like, all the connections with sort of current events, like what's going on in Iran right now. Like, he is selling guidance software that he had made to Iran. The other thing he was trying to sell them, but he got arrested, but he was building in the Philippines, were unmanned drones, which he wanted to deliver drugs, but they wanted for obvious reasons. And so he was right in the mix of sort of everything geopolitical that was going on, as you say, like every kind of like gray market activity that you can think of. Like, he had his hands in it, including, maybe Bitcoin, maybe not.
Yeah. It's like the king of ick. Things feel icky. He's probably the best to work on it for you.
Is there any evidence that or I guess what's your opinion? Was he able to retain any of his assets, or do you think anything's out there in hiding, or you think, will he walk out of prison a rich man or, poor?
I would say yes, I think so. And that's based on pretty good information from people at the DEA who explicitly told me that they were not going after all of his assets. That it just wasn't worth it to try to get them all. And I know he had, trusts set up. He had trusts in the British Virgin Islands, and maybe they got some of it. The question is like, how much, are we talking about, he's got $1 million, he's got $10 million, he's got $30 million. My guess is it's not like some unbelievably vast fortune, but that there's certainly money somewhere. Mm-hmm. Now, it's also the case that a bunch of people came after they learned that he was arrested, and they were no longer afraid of him, and everyone came after money, Mm-hmm. So a lot of that could have gotten drained, but while he's in prison, there's just people siphoning it off, in all directions, whether it's like the gold that was stashed somewhere, or bank accounts that they have access to, or these trusts. He's got a bunch of kids and different families, and so he may have set them up in various ways. I don't know.
About the kids, I mean, can you kind of elaborate on his master plan of world domination through his progeny?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had a sort of like megalomania at a certain point, and he would tell people that he wanted to have as many kids as possible in order to sort of like in the future sort of build the most loyal possible like group around him that would be made up of his kids. I mean, he was like trying to make a cartel out of nothing. And he was married, divorced, and then he had this sort of longtime girlfriend, but then there were a lot of women around. And I interviewed one guy who would basically like dispatched to go find women in the Philippines and elsewhere and like bring them to him. And according to him, for the purposes of impregnating them and having kids. Then when he was in Brazil, I mean, he did have kids by, Brazilian citizens in order to, he believed, protect himself legally from being extradited. That if he had, a citizen child, that offered some protection for him. So he paid, as far as I know, paid a woman in order to have his child. And so, yeah, there was sort of that sort of personal aspect of it wrapped up in it as well.
Huh. So he's a quirky white African tech genius that likes to have lots of kids with different.
That's your headline.
Yeah. Which social media company did he start again? Goodness.
Any thoughts on him upon release from U.S. custody? You think he'll be turned over to any of these other foreign jurisdictions to face prosecution, or into the wind with him?
I don't know. It's so hard to tell. Like at the time that he was sentenced, there was a lot of, his lawyers were fighting for, at one point, trying to get him, instead of being sentenced here, to be sent back to the Philippines. And another time they were trying to keep him from being sent back to the Philippines. And their argument was the Philippines actually banned the death penalty a while back, but they were like basically arguing that the Philippines would restore the death penalty almost entirely to execute Paul Le Roux. And I think it's hard to tell this far out from, his sort of empire being dismantled. Number one, what if anyone's going to be paying attention? Like, are the prosecutors at the end of it, are they going to say, like, where's this guy got a passport? He's got a passport to Australia. He has Australian citizenship, Zimbabwe, he might have South Africa as well. Like, let's just send him to Australia. And if he lands in Australia, the Australians are not going to re-prosecute him, and they're just like, leave the country or whatever. It's possible. it's also possible the Philippine authorities, they very much wanted him. Like, they want to prosecute him for murders in their country. But again, like, will those people even still be in power? Will they, will it have sort of run its course at that point? And then the third question is, like, there are people that Paul Le Roux snitched on, and like, they're not happy about it. So, he may be on the run. I think a lot of people think like he'll get out and he's got money hidden and then he'll set himself up. But you got to remember, like, he very explicitly turned on everyone who worked for him, including a lot of mercenaries and also cartels, running government. Like, he tried to turn on everyone. So he probably has a lot of enemies out there. I don't know how far he's going to stick his head up, when he gets out. Maybe he'll go live a quiet life somewhere, but it's completely unknown. I think they don't even know where they're going to send him when he gets out. I doubt anyone's even figured that out.
Okay.
As the resident Daniel Webster of Paul Le Roux, have you ever attempted to talk to him directly?
Many times.
Yeah. How does that go?
Well, I've never spoken to him because, initially when I first started the reporting, he was kept completely in secret. They were holding him in secret in the facility in Queens, and there was no access to him. Like, you couldn't write to him or anything. So I went through a series of lawyers that he had, none of whom ever would connect me with him. Now, I don't know if it was their choice or his choice. They claimed they were passing on messages to him, but he would have been, frankly, an idiot to talk to me. So I'm not surprised that he was in the middle of cooperating with the federal authorities on a huge case. So talking to a reporter would have been a big mistake on his part. I still would have loved it if he had done so. And then once the case resolved, then he had sentencing. And so probably didn't want to do anything to mess up his sentencing. Maybe just didn't want to talk at all. And then once he was sentenced, I have subsequently tried to talk to him. Like, recently, I can't remember the last time I sent him a letter, maybe last year. But now what's in it for him? I think he probably wants the publicity to just go away. And talking to me probably only has a chance of like reviving it. Someone told me that he had read at least a copy of my original stories, if not the book, but I don't know if that's true. Someone from inside the prison. I don't know if that's true either. So I've talked to relatives of his and friends and people who worked for him, but I have never spoken directly to Le Roux. He did testify at length multiple times. So I've heard some of his, at least on the stand, version of what happened.
Well, Evan, is there any new projects that you have coming down the pipe?
Well, for the last couple of years, I've been doing this. It's kind of different, but this podcast is called Shell Game, which is a kind of series of like immersive experiments with agentic AI that are kind of weird and funny. So I've been invested in that for a while. Anyone can find that on a podcast place where they get their podcast. And then, I still write magazine stories for all the magazines you name, like Bloomberg Business Week and Wired and things like that. So just kind of like looking for the next story always.
Nice. Any
what is that? What is that Shell Game podcast? Kind of what's the nuts and bolts of it? It's just experiments with AI. Is that what it is essentially?
Well, in season 1, I made a clone of myself, of my voice, and I connected it up to my phone line, and then I basically had it impersonate me for months. So including to my family, to my friends, and I sort of was investigating what is it like when people encounter a version of you that's not actually you. And then for season 2, I started a company that is run entirely by AI agents, where I was the only human involved. And that's sort of exploring all you can do in terms of like AI employees and like giving them autonomy and giving them their own personalities. And it's sort of a comedy, but it is really exploring this like near future of what AI is going to be doing to our workplace.
Interesting. What if people want to follow your work, what social media platforms are you on currently?
I'm trying to get off of all of them. I can't stand social media. But I'm on Twitter, X, Ev_Rat. That's probably the best place. I don't tweet a lot anymore, but I'm there.
Good deal. Well, we certainly appreciate your time talking to us today. The Mastermind, awesome book. I loved it. And we appreciate
Me too. Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. Yeah. Happy to talk.
Yeah. If you want to stay on a few more minutes after we stop, I'll chat with you.
Sounds good.
All right. That's going to be a wrap for episode 24 with Evan Ratliff, author of The Mastermind.